Did you know your designs have the power to influence people to remember certain things or pick certain options? In this video, we are going to talk about 3 laws that can affect the decisions of your users just based on how you place the items. So let's check it out. Alright, so let's start with the scenario. Let's say you want to go for grocery shopping and you make a list of all the items that you're planning to buy. So you write everything down. You start with soap, apples, mugs, batteries, chips, Maggi, juice, tea and ketchup. Now after you've made the list, you rush to your car, you sit in the car and you just drive off to the grocery store. As soon as you reach the grocery store, you look into your bag and you realize, oh, I have forgotten the grocery list at home. Now you can't go all the way back, so you thought might as well start shopping. Now you just recalled all these items from your memory and you're trying to think, and what are the first 2 items that come in your mind? I bet it's soap and ketchup because they were the first and the last items on the list. This is called serial position effect. This phenomena was discovered by Hermann Ebbinghaus. He was a German psychologist who was a pioneer of memory research. According to this psychological phenomena, people best remember the first and the last item in a sequence. So let's break it down. So this law is a combination of 2 concepts, primacy effect and recency effect. The primacy effect refers to our tendency to remember things when we first hear them. Do you know why this happens? This is because our attention span is at maximum and our cognitive load is at minimum. So whatever we are hearing for the first time, we tend to remember better. For instance, if you start talking to a friend and they start telling you about an incident, they start with a certain incident and then they go on and on and on and on in the conversation and you completely zone out. What part of the conversation do you think you remember the most? The point where they started, right? That is exactly what primacy effect is. Do you ever talk to your father about buying you something expensive and they immediately tell you, oh my god, this is too expensive. In our time, we used to buy this for such a cheap price. Do you know why this happens? It's because the first time they bought that item, let's say a TV or let's say a phone, when they first bought it during their school time or their first job, it was way cheaper, and that has anchored the price to today's phone or today's items, and that is called anchoring, where your future decisions are actually a comparison from your previously heard information. That is why a lot of apps and websites today slash the price. They first show you a higher price and your mind anchors that price, that oh okay, this is worth 500 rupees, and then they will slash it down to 250 rupees. Suddenly you will feel like you've saved a lot, whereas probably the price was originally 250 rupees. You never know. Okay, so let's look at another example of primacy effect. Here I need a little bit of your help in picking a good candidate for my company. So we will look at 2 people and their character traits, and based on that we will pick a better fit. Ready? Here are the traits of the first candidate. Overthinks, lazy, attention to detail, empathetic, designs fast, good visual skills, money-minded, short temper. Here are the traits of the second candidate. Attention to detail, designs fast, empathetic, money-minded, short temper, overthinks, lazy, good visual skills. Which one would you pick? Now I'm sure you chose the second person. But did you realize they have the exact same traits, just shuffled in a different manner? Why do you think you chose the second person? It's because we started with all the positive traits and then went to the negative ones. Whereas for the first one, we started with the negative traits and hence your mind got anchored to those negative traits and you started looking at the person from that perspective. I'm sure now you know why first impression always counts. Now let's look at the second concept of the serial position effect. It's called the recency effect. The most recent events are very easy for the brain to remember. So the last item in a list or the recent event that has occurred is very easy for you to recall because it does not take a toll on your memory and does not take a lot of cognitive load. Now you might have experienced this in your life. When you often zone out in a conversation, your teacher or your friend asks you, do you know what I was talking about? And without giving it a thought, you can almost immediately tell what was the last few words they said. Why does that happen? That is because of the recency effect. So it's always a good idea to group your information and help the users remember more. Now we know that the first and the last item is very easy to remember in a series. But what if I want something to stand out in my design? What if I want to intentionally make an element stand out? What do I do in such a case? Von Restorff Effect. Let's understand this with an example. Let's say I give you a list of items. Apples, carrots, paper, tomatoes, cherries, papaya, banana. Which one do you think stands out the most? Paper, right? Why do you think that is the case? Because it's the weirdest one in the list. The Von Restorff Effect or the isolation effect suggests that people are more likely to remember items that stand out or that are even slightly unique compared to the rest of the lot. So the more something stands out, more likely it is to be remembered by people. For example, a green apple in a bundle of red apples. This theory was coined by German psychiatrist and pediatrician Hedwig von Restorff in 1933 when she found out that participants were presented with a list of similar items and the ones that were most unique or isolated stood out. So what makes certain information or things stand out from the rest of them? Color, size, shape, motion, and orientation. Have you ever highlighted an information in the book? It's so easy to look back at the notes or the highlighted area, right? Because it makes the information stand out from the rest of the sentences on the page. Now let's see how it can be implemented in our designs. Have you seen those pricing plan pages where one plan is highlighted compared to the others? So here the business is actually pointing out and helping the users pick an option that will be beneficial for them. In fact, if you observe closely, you will see that the primary buttons stand out from the group of secondary buttons or the rest of the buttons on the website. That is because you want the user to look at that primary button and take that primary action. Now, so far, we have been talking about lists and items. But what if we want our users to remember certain experiences? How do we make them stand out? Apparently, our brain takes out a very simple way to remember any experience or define whether it was good or it was bad. Let's take a scenario. You're feeling very hungry and you decide to go out and sit in a restaurant. You go there, you have the entire experience of eating a meal, and towards the end, the waiter comes and gives you a feedback form. Very simply, you just write, it was a great experience. But how did you decide it was a great experience? Ideally, you should have calculated this based on various parameters like food, bills, services, whom you went with, ambience, what was the experience when you entered, what was the experience when you got the bill, and many more things like that. But do you actually make a list of all these experiences and take out a total average, and based on that you tell the waiter whether it was a good or a bad experience? Turns out that's not the case. Often whenever we rate an experience, we tend to ignore a lot of parts about it, and our judgment is only based on two parts. That is how we felt at the peak and how our experience ended. So this theory was discovered with an interesting experiment. Two sets of participants were taken. One set was asked to dip their hand in 14 degrees Celsius water for 60 seconds. It was really cold. And the second set was again asked to dip their hands in cold 14 degrees Celsius water for 60 seconds. But this time they were asked to dip their hands for 30 extra seconds in 15 degrees Celsius water. So towards the end, the water was slightly warmer than the 14 degrees Celsius water. And then both the sets of people were asked about their experiences. People had more positive feedback in the second set of group. Even though they kept their hands in cold water for a longer duration, they did not care about the duration or the time they spent, because at the end of the experiment, the water became slightly warmer. Now, if you think about a design project that you enjoyed a lot, now that project might have some really intense or bad moments, but towards the end, if a project was successful and you had a great time towards the end, I'm sure you're going to call it a great project for yourself. It's the same with user journey. When we look at user journey graphs and we look at the overall journey, there might be some good or bad experiences, but the user tends to define the experience based on the peak moments and how they felt towards the end of the journey. So do you know the trick? It's very important to take care of how you conclude someone's journey. And do you know your users actually enjoy the experience even more if the end and the peak moment was actually the same. So make sure when you're designing a landing page or a user flow, your user has a great experience towards the end. That means the checkout flow, the payment gateways, and the overall experience towards the end, it ends on a high note. Now I'm sure you're ready to influence your users with your designs. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do check out this one.